hang on for 1 second. I want to bring in Alan dos Santos, one of Bolsonaro's lieutenants. Alan, you heard Jim Rickards. We talked about it with Steve Cortez. We're going to talk about it all in the evening show. Peter Navarro is going to join us. Our most significant, traditionally Brazil is the key nation in Latin America. The relationship between President Trump and Bolsonaro couldn't be stronger. The Bolsonaro movement's really aligned with MAGA. You got Jim Rickards talking about the National Security Memo, Strategy Memo, which talks about the primacy of Latin American hemispheric defense in American eyes. Yet now we've got Lula, looks like ascendant, and Bolsonaro in prison. Can you make that make sense for us, sir?
So what is happening with Bolsonaro right now, it's not justice, okay? It's a deliberate act of a political cruelty. Bolsonaro is not being treated as a defendant under rule of law, Steve. And first of all, thank you so much for having me a chance to explain that to the world. Bolsonaro is being just treated as a symbol to be crushed, destroyed physically and morally. That's why Lula da Silva is doing that against Bolsonaro. Of course, some media outlet is going to say it's not Lula, it's the judiciary which is doing this. But the point is, and the problem, Lula appointed most of the Supreme Court justice so far, and the judge, which was delisted by the Magnitsky Act in the United States, unfortunately, demorized. He is a cruel person. He wants to see Bolsonaro dying. Even his surgery needed to be with his sign and his authorization, which is ridiculous. Even drug cartels leaders in Brazilian prison doesn't need to have this kind of authority.
But I want to go back to hang on the personal, and we'll get into that maybe later, because it's horrible, it's horrific what's happening to President Bolsonaro. But strategically, Brazil's the key that picks the lock in Latin America, in South America. Yes. Correct? I mean, it's the biggest. It's got some of the greatest resources. It's got the Amazon, the lungs of the world. Whereas we're bailing out Malay. We're off the coast with the biggest armada we've had since, I think, bigger than the Gulf War. You almost have to go back to Vietnam. Where does Brazil fit into all this? Because Bolsonaro as an individual is very important. It's horrible what's happening, and they're trying to take him out of the presidential election. But there's something going on there strategically. How important, if we're going to have a hemispheric defense and a Trump corollary that essentially says we're going to, with our partners, be dominant in Latin America, and we're not going to let the CCP in. The CCP is Lula's partner. The CCP is all over Brazil right now, sir.
So the CCP is doing a job together with Lula for a long time already. When Lula tried to reach out the CCP back in 2002 to support his campaign for his first term in 2003, he was along the CCP all over during all this time. And Dilma Rousseff, who was appointed by Lula to be the next president after he stayed for 8 years in Brazil, also connected Brazil with China. China is the first biggest ally, economic ally in Brazil, but it was the United States previously. So China just got the first rank as a trade ally with Brazil, because of the Workers' Party, because of the socialists, because of the communists in Brazil. So they want Bolsonaro out to keep this job. So I really hope with this new memo that came out in November from the White House, the National Security Act, I hope that can put Bolsonaro out of jail. And I hope that Lula will also be recognized as a criminal, because he is behind Maduro, he is behind the São Paulo's Forum, he is behind all the drug cartel, even the terrorists in Brazil. Lula is being praised by Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda all the time, and he never condemned these terrorists as a terrorist. He even refused to recognize the PCC, which is the drug cartel in Brazil, as a terrorist group.
Real quickly, I got about a minute on JBS. I know that there's going to be a big government crackdown, I think, on JBS, the United States government. Navarro and these guys are working on it nonstop. Give us a minute on JBS, this beef distributor, where this fits into the Lula cartel.
So JBS is a government-backed company that grew up with a bank financial supply. And it was already condemned, this company, JBS, was already condemned in Brazil for corruption. So the penalties are being erased by the Supreme Court justice thoughtfully, but they are still criminals and they are still guilty. But they are behind of Lula da Silva strategy between the United States and Brazil. But the problem is they are one of the largest big supply in America. There are 4 companies that controls the beef in America, and 2 of them are Brazilians, and the 2 of them already corrupted in Brazil with well-documented proof. It's not opinion, it's not allegations, it's facts. So we need to go after them through the DOJ to get Brazil right and back.
I think that started. Alan, where do people go to get you on this fight for the freedom of President Bolsonaro and the Bolsonaro movement, which is bigger than ever? Where do people go, sir? AlanDosSantos.net is an English version of it. We are on YouTube, X, Getter. They can find the timeline media that we built from the ashes here in America. They destroyed my company in Brazil, and we rebuilt everything here with Lacombe and Max Cardozo with me in Orlando. And thank you so much, Steve. We need to treat Lula as we are dealing with Maduro. Please. He's a Marxist. Exactly. We'll have more of this next week. Merry Christmas, sir.